Absolutely horrific news out of Sydney, Australia, one of the world's most beautiful cities. At Sydney's world-famous Bondi Beach, a crowd of hundreds of Jews had gathered to celebrate the Jewish holiday of Hanukkah. But two heavily armed Muslim migrants from Pakistan, father and son, were there also, and they proceeded to shoot dozens of Jews, killing, I think the latest death toll is 16, wounding 30 or so more. It was a massacre in Australia, of all places, in Sydney. A little bit later, we'll talk to our friend Avi Yamini, our Australia bureau chief. He interviewed a witness yesterday who was there, and he went to Sydney today. We'll get an update from him shortly. I don't know, Australia is not a country I might normally associate with terrorism. How about you? But neither is Canada. In fact, the two countries are remarkably similar in their approach to Islamic extremism. Like Canada, Australia has had an open borders policy towards immigrants, bringing in hundreds of thousands from the most anti-Semitic extremist backwaters in the world, including Pakistan, where the murderers were from yesterday. None of the migrants in Australia are vetted to weed out anti-Jewish, anti-Christian, anti-Western views. Like Canada, Australia's government and media have tolerated public expressions not only of deep anti-Semitic hatred, but of support for violent terrorism, including a massive march in support of Hamas and chants calling for worldwide anti-Semitism, a worldwide pogrom to globalize the Intifada. So-called hate speech laws are never used against Islamists. They're reserved more and more for right-wingers and Christians who speak out against Islamists. And like Canada, Australia has publicly aligned itself with the terrorists, unilaterally declaring their support for Palestinian sovereignty under its current Hamas leadership. And so no preconditions. They didn't have to lay down their arms. They didn't have to agree to a peace deal. They were granted sovereignty by Australia, as if Australia had the power to do so, which is Canada did too. A symbolic move for which Hamas publicly thanked Australia and Canada. So it was an unmistakable signal that Australia and Canada were happy to deal with murderous terrorist regimes. What signal do you think that gave the hundreds of thousands of migrants? So I ask again, if those conditions were sufficient for a terrorist attack in Sydney, mass immigration, unvetted people from anti-Semitic countries, and all sorts of nodding along and winking along to Hamas, if those conditions created a mass terrorist attack in Sydney, why wouldn't they be enough for a terrorist attack in Toronto, Montreal, Ottawa, or other Canadian cities? And there's one more thing I've got to mention. In Australia, like in Canada, it's very difficult for law-abiding people to get firearms to defend themselves. Now, news reports say there were half a dozen private security guards at the Bondi Beach event for Hanukkah, which rings true. That's sort of how it is in Toronto and Montreal, too. I say that from personal experience. But they were unarmed. What's the use of that? Like, literally, what is the point of that? Someone says, I'll arm wrestle you. Okay, fine. Other than that, what's the point of unarmed guards? What exactly are they guarding? In fact, eyewitness reports say that the Sydney police arrived on the scene, but instead of immediately engaging with the terrorists, they hid out of fear. Here's one man saying so.
I couldn't hear. The shooting was so loud that we couldn't hear. They said I was too far. He was on a bridge. I was near the tent. So, but I saw. I look at him. I look what he shot. I look at his rifle. He aimed. He did. He really take his time. He should take his time. And 4 policemen there didn't give fire back. I don't understand why. Why?
What was going through your mind?
I feel like I'm Israeli. I'm familiar with this situation, but it's terrible in the middle of Bondi. It's terrible.
Later photographs show that a number of the police on the scene were females. And, I'm all for equal opportunity, but it seems like in certain critical moments, running into a hail of gunfire is a particularly male thing. You might recall that when Donald Trump was shot in the ear, nearly being assassinated, it was the female Secret Service agents that panicked, that didn't know what to do, that were asking for advice and blathering. I'm not saying all women are that way, but there's something I think inherently about being shot at where women, their genetic instincts kick in. They preserve their lives as we would want them to, and men run to the danger. I think had there been male police on the scene who weren't worried about protecting themselves rather than the citizens, perhaps this shooting spree would have been stopped sooner. By the way, there is a Bondi Beach police station a 3 minutes walk away. Why were the shootings going on for nearly 20 minutes? It took a local bystander to rush one of the terrorists, grabbing his gun, but not knowing how to use it. That bystander is reported to be a Muslim man himself, although I've seen other reports that he's a Maronite Christian Arab. Either way, he's a hero for stopping, I presume, more murders. But I deeply fear that what we've just seen in Australia will come to Canada. I think it's already here in many ways. It's just hasn't manifested itself yet. We've already seen plenty of dry runs. Anti-Semitic crimes, and I mean real crimes. I'm not talking about feelings crimes or hate crimes. I'm talking about real crimes are so common, they no longer even make the news. And when they're newsy, I can see that the police and the media are trying not to call them terrorist events. They're just fires. I mean, one Jewish girls' school in the Toronto area has been attacked on 3 separate occasions by gunfire. I went to one of the press conferences there. The police refused to say the words Jewish or anti-Semitic. They were just pretending it was a regular gunfire, you know, the kind that targets Jewish girls' schools. There's a synagogue in North Toronto that has been vandalized literally 10 times. And every week, a group of Hamas supporters drives into the heart of a Jewish neighborhood near where I live, right in the middle of the day, and they walk through residential streets screaming at every Jew they can find, and they're wearing masks and they're dressed with Hamas regalia. Police don't stop them. They actually escort them. Are those dry runs? Are they self-radicalizing exercises? I don't know. Like Australia, Canada is known as a soft touch for terrorism. We refuse to criminalize terrorist groups like the Muslim Brotherhood, even though the United States is doing so, and other countries like the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia have already done so. We know that there are hundreds of Iranian agents operating freely in Canada. We know there's hundreds of Hezbollah agents operating freely in Canada. And we've had our share of terrorist attacks too, by the way. Don't forget, an ISIS gunman burst into Parliament itself in a hail of gunfire. In the past dozen years, we've seen a Muslim convert named Ahmed Rouleau who rammed his vehicle into a Canadian Forces warrant officer, Patrice Vincent. Remember that? Killed him in his car. Remember the ISIS terrorist Michael Zehaf Bibo? He walked up to Corporal Nathan Cirillo at the National War Memorial, murdered him at point-blank range, and then went into Parliament. That was the guy who stormed Parliament. A Somali extremist, Abdullahi Sharif, stabbed an Edmonton police officer named Mike Chernick, and then rammed his car into 4 bystanders. And then there's the terrorist plots like the Toronto 18 bomb plot, the Via Rail bomb plot. These are just cases that the authorities can't deny are Islamic or terrorist by nature. I think most terrorist attacks are simply renamed crimes or mental illness. So what happens now? Well, nothing, of course. I mean, Mark Carney here in Canada is pursuing Justin Trudeau's policy of mass unvetted immigration, including, incredibly, from the terrorist-infested Gaza Strip itself. We're taking more than any other country from there. Are we insane? Politicians were online last night saying they will stand with the Jews, but they won't. They literally won't stand with the Jews. Many politicians now refuse to attend Jewish events as opposed to Israeli events. I'm not even talking about Israel anymore because their new anti-Semitic voter base will not tolerate them being seen with Jews. The president of Ireland put out a tweet about Australia. He didn't use the word Jews because that would be too unpopular with the woke anti-Semites and the foreign anti-Semites in Ireland. It's crazy. Toronto's mayor is particularly bad for this. And Jews in Canada, like Jews in Australia, going to continue to be helpless. There's not a single synagogue or school or Jewish community center or Jewish bakery or restaurant in Canada that has an armed guard. They're sitting ducks just like at Bondi Beach. thanks to gun control that applies only to law-abiding citizens, not criminals or terrorists. I am very genuinely worried about Canada, not just for the Jews, but for all of us. I mean, if you don't change direction, you'll probably end up where you're heading. And we're heading to a disaster. I've been to Europe enough to know what that looks like when it comes to mass immigration and Islamic extremism and no-go zones. I think that we're in a real danger. I think that Australia should be a warning about fake policing. Even worse, when the Prime Minister of Australia took to the microphones today, he said, it's incredible to behold, he said he wants to crack down on, you guessed it, right-wing extremist groups. Take a look at this video.
We take ASIO's advice very seriously. We work closely with them. We receive regular updates as well. The Director General of ASIO has warned about a range of threats, be it anti-Semitism, the rise of right-wing extremist groups as well, and we continue to work closely with our security agencies.
Yeah, that wasn't right-wing extremist groups. That was father and son who were radicalized at a mosque. It's nothing to do with right-wing. They're also talking more about firearms bans. What's that got to do with it? If it wasn't firearms, it would be knives. It wasn't knives. I mean, one of the worst massacres by an Islamic terrorist in recent history was in Nice, France, where an Islamic terrorist got behind the wheel of a very large and powerful truck. It was like a big, more than a semi, it was a very powerful vehicle, and it just went down a coastline in Nice, and it murdered 83 people in a row. Smash, smash, smash with the truck. You going to ban trucks? It could be anything used as a weapon. Focusing on right-wingers is absurd, but focusing on guns isn't the point. In fact, you need more guns to protect the synagogues and schools. I'm worried that here in Canada we're sitting ducks. I'm worried that our politicians won't care. And I'm worried that it's just a matter of time before we have a Bondi Beach massacre in Canada too.